Whilst we talk a lot about consciousness, the buzz around human energy is low-key. Perhaps human energy is not just a component of the universal energy, but a consequence of our consciousness as well. How would you define energy in human terms? Human energy?
I would say that it's a beautiful way to increase your vibration and clear traumas and update your mindset.
So, does consciousness flow from energy, or are the varying levels of energy in different human beings a consequence of their level of consciousness?
Like the universe works in energies, and in everything that we do, we're all interconnected and intertwined, and what one does to one affects the other. Even in our thinking, in our psyche, it definitely affects the other.
What happens when consciousness hits a rough patch of realization and levels of energy dip low? For Theosophists and natural healers, the answer is obvious. Just use the universal life force as healing energy.
That there are many different ways to approach it, but the way I approach it is I open the records and I bring in the Reiki energy, and I am guided by my spirit team on where to go. And I will find a source of trauma, or, an area where trauma presents, right? And then work with the energy to clear it out. Emotions, which are the crux of the energy work, means energy and motion. So when you're not feeling your emotions, the energy doesn't move and it gets stuck.
A survey conducted by National Institute of Health, NIH, in 2008 found that over 1.2 million adults and 161,000 children in the United States had received energy healing like Reiki in the previous year. Reiki is now used by a growing number of people around the world who believe it helps with relaxation, with anxiety, pain management, and even depression.
Part of it, you have to identify the emotion. What can happen is you have a trauma, something unexpected happens that's harsh, and you're not in a place where you can handle that trauma. So you push it down, typically behind you. A lot of people have low back or back pain because they've stored stuff they can't address behind them, right? And then if you don't further address that energy, then it becomes chronic pain, and from there it becomes disease. So allowing the energy to flow, like when you're sad and you want to cry, but you don't want someone to see you cry and you don't, then you have stopped your emotional flow. And that's something that we all deal with from time to time, but the more you do it, the more debilitating it can become.
There are many doubts about the real power of healing by touch, or Reiki healing, or energy healing. To get an overview of energy healing, I spoke with Tami Folkenflik. She is an energy and movement specialist based in St. Petersburg, Florida. I also spoke with Nicole Macina, a young Reiki believer. If you were to define just human consciousness, individual human consciousness, how would you define it?
That's a good question. I think human consciousness can be defined as energy processes, energy transfers. from like whole body, mind, soul, spiritually, emotionally.
So when you're doing energy work, the worker, me, I put up a protective barrier for my own energy so that it can go out and assist, but it doesn't allow any of the trauma to come through and affect me. Now it will, in as far as I have been known to feel the emotions and cry during a session. Sometimes I'm crying for the other person because they cannot yet cry. It does come through, but it doesn't, I know how to allow that to flow through and not become part of me.
How do you manage that? How do you put up that protective barrier for the emotion not to disturb your equilibrium?
There's probably 1,000 or more ways to do it. One of them is being deeply grounded, right? So that you have access to the earth who can transmute a lot of the negative energies. So when I'm working with someone, if I feel that come in, I tell my higher self, just push that right down through the ground cord so Mother Earth can, recreate that into a clean energy, a fresh energy. So that's one of the ways that I protect myself. I put a bubble around me that deflects some of the extraneous things that might come at a person doing this work. Like I said, there's thousands of ways. That's just a couple of the ways that I utilize.
The one question that I want to really ask you is, how can you heal if the circumstances of that person who needs healing have not changed, if they remain stagnant? So if a person, for instance, if a lot of women go through abuse, if that abuse continues, the circumstance does not change, how do you heal? Because the root cause of their pain is still there.
So that's more of a mindset shift that makes that happen. So say you're in a job that you absolutely hate and you don't feel like you can quit your job or look for another job. If you find something about that you cannot hate, say, well, I don't really enjoy my job, but the people I work with are amazing. Then you focus on working on the people you're working with and not the work you're doing. And it can go the other way. Maybe you don't like the people you work with, but you love the content of what you're doing. Make that your focus and push other distractions away.
In a way, this kind of healing, this energy healing or human energy healing from one to the other is challenging the whole stream of medicine. How there's a lot of resources being put into mental health, and you are challenging that and saying that here's an alternate way other than that mainstream medical way of dealing with these kind of issues. You're saying
I think it's just a different way of looking at it. For myself, I went through my own trauma, which is why I found all of these different modalities, and I knew that I needed help. But I also knew that the standard psychologist, psychiatrist route wasn't for me. There's nothing wrong with it if it works for people. But I instinctively knew it was not going to serve me the best. So I went looking for something outside the box. So yes, there is a lot of trauma healing involved. And I think it's a replacement or can work in tandem with someone who's open to that, right? But it's not always embraced by the medical profession.
Once I started Reiki and I was interested in it, I became open to more healing modalities, and I became open to healing of my mind and my body through energies.
So do you need, obviously in Reiki, you need a healer. Does that kind of expose you further? You are vulnerable if you, whatever you've gone through, and then you have to share it. Does it make you vulnerable, or is it like going to a doctor and getting healed?
Reiki, you have to definitely believe in it, and it's not like going to a doctor, because doctors provide only physical healing, I find. And they see your ailment and they know how to treat it using like more Western modalities. But then when it comes to Reiki, it has to work both ways, I believe. And going to a Reiki practitioner who is trained, they also have to be open to healing you and getting to know you. I heard of Reiki healing online as well. But I believe that it's a reciprocal process.
In fact, it's not even the mainstream of medicine. The challenge is, how do you get this kind of practice into the mainstream, or as a form of alternate medicine, or alternate way of healing?
I think it's a replacement, or can work in tandem with someone who's open to that, right? But it's not always embraced by the medical profession.
And it's expensive. It's not covered by it does not have any health coverage. Of course, I'm not sure about the insurance bit, but how do you get this kind of stuff into the mainstream and get it accepted as a way of healing?
I consider it a form of medicine, right? Because like getting out in nature, reconnecting with nature is something that a lot of people don't do. And like, take anxiety, for instance. One of the best things you can do if you're facing an anxiety episode is to start with really focused, deep breathing and do it outside. If you can be outside doing that, there's ions in the air that support your healing. Trees are big healers. People don't, people joke about tree huggers. They know what's going on. You hug a tree and that tree will take all of the stuff you are willing to part with, and they can transmute that into fresh energy. So it's clean and vital instead of heavy and oppressive.
You're also into global healing. What's the difference between Reiki and global healing? Is there some kind of a differentiation between the two?
So global healing is the collective conscious of the Akashic records. So it's done mostly in groups, right? So if I say I'm going to offer a group healing on trauma, then people who have trauma are going to come, right? And they're all, whether they actually, often they have the very, very similar traumas, the people who are called to come into a session. And that's because of that global connection, that global consciousness. Something says, you should give this a try, right? Then people who have trauma are going to come, right? And they're all, whether they actually, often they have the very, very similar traumas, the people who are called to come into a session. And that's because of that global connection, that global consciousness. Something says, you should give this a try, right? Yeah. So the Akashic records, I do a lot of one-on-one because you can be more specific. It can be more focused. When you're doing a group, it's whatever the group needs as a whole. And it's just really fascinating, very powerful.
But some would challenge that global consciousness is not on an equal level of consciousness. It's not an equal level of consciousness. For instance, you have a lot of people. When you talk of global consciousness, you visualize a lot of people, and each has his or her own developmental path. Each has his own different consciousness, and there might be a clash in the level of evolution or the level of consciousness in each. Within that group, there might be people. For instance, there might not be a homogeneous group of people. some may be native, some may be Asian, some may be Caucasian, and some may be black. So the black will have the resentment against the Caucasian for the years or centuries of slave trade, and they may look at that person with a little bit of trepidation, and there may be the Asian thinking, oh, there is still injustice against me, and the native says, oh, you've taken away everything that I had. So when you put these people on that is part of your global consciousness, and it is uneven consciousness. So how do you heal people who are at different levels of consciousness as a group?
Ultimately, what it is dense energy or energy that's not flowing for all trauma, right? It is a blockage in the flow. So if someone, if I have a group of diverse people coming together with various traumas, say, you have someone who had a trauma, they lost a loved one. You have someone who lost a job. You have someone who maybe lost a spouse or a child, or like some big dream job didn't come through. They're all still trauma.
Oh, I got you. I got the answer. You are saying that it's the trauma that is the universal commonality between that disparate group of people in that collective, and that trauma is what you heal. And so the commonality is not the differences. The commonality of the trauma overcomes the differences or the variables in that collective act. I got it.
All of those traumas, they're going to hit the heart. Right? So I would be guided to do a lot of heart chakra work for a trauma session. Now, if it was a different kind of trauma, you fell and you injured a hip, right? Or you have sciatica or a back pain for whatever, then that would be a lower chakra that would be the focus to clear out that blocked energy and to help it flow again. And in a group session, it can be as powerful or not as for each individual as they intend, right? Intention is a lot of the background for this work, for both my own intention and the people coming and what they choose to get from the session.
There's also this question of human healing vis-a-vis spiritual healing. You know how they say that in Christianity there is this belief in spiritual healing, and it's blasphemy to say that human energy can heal. It goes against the preachings or teachings of the Bible, where Christ is the healer. So you're actually placing it on the same keel as spiritual healing. How do you react to that?
I'll give you an example. I have a client who has a very strong Christian faith, and the excitement of the client led the person to speak with others at their church, and one in particular indicated that it's the devil's work and she should stop immediately.
Oh, wow.
And so she told me this, my client.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay, you've had many sessions with me now. Has anything ever felt evil? And she's like, well, no. I said, that's because I'm working with God. It might not be understood in a lot of different religions, but it's a very spiritual practice. So in my own history, they are quite diverse. I'm very spiritual, but I'm not religious. But I can work with religious people. I understand the connection that they have. Mine just comes from a different place. So from my perspective, both the Akashic Records and Reiki draw many positive aspects from many different religions. But they skip the, like, say, Catholic guilt is not part of what we do. Part of what I do is help people recover from that when they're ready to have a different viewpoint.
Today, our meditation, the 11 Akashic Prayers for Transformation. These are 11 prayers that you can say that allow you to receive healing and transformative benefits when you access the Akashic Records. We've done several Akashic Record meditations, and the Akashic Record is incredibly powerful, and it's very important right now because it's awakening on this planet. This field of energy that carries all the memories of every one of your lives and everyone's life.
Coming now to Akashic, how do you explain Akashic? How do you access Akashic records? And how do you interpret them?
I define it as a giant energetic library. So this makes me old school, but think back to when you went to the library and you pulled out a drawer and you picked a card out of the card catalog. So every card is either an emotion or an event or a thought. So it's massive, from your timelines, all lifetimes, dimensions. Everybody's is part of this collective Akashic record library. So it's ginormous. In, I mean, if you tried to really wrap your head around the information that's stored there, it can be crippling because there's just so much.
One question that comes to mind is, it's so amazing. I mean, there's this huge space around us, and our energy, our emotions, our life is all trapped in there. It doesn't matter we are alive or dead. It's a cumulative centuries of evolutionary pathway. It's so amazing, but how do you access that?
To me, it's just part of the ethos, right? I mean, it's there, it's all around us. It's accessible to anyone who chooses to do so, right? So I have specific training, and I have a little prayer that I say that connects me to where I want to go within the records, whether it's a group or an individual. I'm sure there's other ways to work with. And of course, the permission, if I'm working with an individual person, that permission comes, my accessing the record comes because they say I'm allowed to access the records. So like, go ahead.
Where are those records?
Where are they?
Yeah.
Everywhere and nowhere.
That's interesting.
Right?
How do you interpret or read them? It's so amazing. How do you?
I'm sorry, you've broken up.
How do you read them? How do you actually read them?
Okay, so I have my spirit team, right? And they feed me the information, right? So I open the records and I tell them my intention. Is my intention to work on a group collective trauma? Then they will feed me information for that and how to clear it. Like, is it a heart thing? Is it because someone doesn't know how to use their voice anymore, right? If you have been tampered down, you're too much, you're not enough. You should be seen and not heard. You shouldn't be seen or heard, right? Those are all very debilitating, and most of them affect the throat, right? Then you're afraid to speak for yourself, so you've lost your voice. So, I get that information, like, your focus needs to be in the throat chakra. These people are not being heard, and they no longer know how to use their own voice. So, and if I was working with an individual, it would be more specific, right? Mom always told you weren't good enough. So you learned you weren't good enough. So then you stopped asking questions or trying to learn things because you weren't good enough to do so.
How long does it take for a person to heal?
Well, it depends. It depends on how dedicated the person is to the work. It depends on how deep the traumas go. Sometimes there are multi-generational traumas. That is one of the ways that we carry trauma unknown to us. is through our ancestral lineage. And women get a little bit more baggage than men, simply because when your grandmother was pregnant with your mother, you were already part of your mother. So you absorb all of that trauma just by being in her body, right? And it goes back for a minimum of 7 generations back in the female line.
Wow.
Yes. So when you do this work, the beautiful thing is you clear your own line, 7 generations back, 7 generations forward. So you can prevent your children from having some of the same traumas that you have by clearing them.
But a person has to completely open up to you. I mean, you have to, the person has to completely be bare in front of you, right? Has to bear them, but the person has to bear himself or herself in front of you. It's a complete bearing of your inner self.
The more open you are to healing, the easier it is to heal. It still can happen. It just takes a little bit longer when you're resistant. And I started that way. I started very resistant because it takes looking largely at things that you don't like about yourself, right? I had most of my life where I was very prone to anger, and I took everything personally. Well, it wasn't really my trauma, it was inherited stuff, but I didn't know that. And I didn't know any other way to address it by being angry, because that was what was acceptable in my home. So in order for me to clear that, I had to really look at myself and say, you know, why does this make you angry? And then you take it from there. Is it really my anger? Lots of times, no, the answer is not. So whose anger is it, and how can I clear it so that I'm not carrying it or passing it forward?
So what does it mean? What does human consciousness mean? This is something that gets a lot of different answers. But you've been practicing Reiki. What does it mean for you? We, of course, have a collective consciousness, but the scientific world has not been able to prove that. There is no particular place in our form that, in our physical form or biological form, that leads you to that particular point of consciousness, of universal consciousness, especially. So how do you explain that, and how would you define it?
Well, you've had synchronicities, right? Where you're thinking, oh, I should call mom, and mom calls. To me, that is proof of the collective conscious, because you put a thought out there and she responded to the thought. Right? Now, how many people globally believe in beings that you can't see? Every single religion has a being of some sort that's not visible. They may have statues or some kind of symbolic item that they utilize, but if you're talking about God, there's no visual. I mean, you can't walk anywhere and say, oh, there's God. And yet you can, because every tree and every beautiful thing in nature is God. So to me, it's everywhere and nowhere, like the Akashic records. They are an integral part of our being when we understand and allow them. Like sometimes some of the anxiety nowadays that people suffer from, and they don't understand why they're so anxious, is that collective conscious. There's a lot of things going on in the world that are not uplifting, right? So if you're prone to depression or anxiety and you spend too much time watching the news, it's going to exacerbate everything because of that collective conscious. It can anyway, but with that 24-hour in-your-face aspect of our world now, it makes it that much more challenging for individuals who are sensitive to the negative aspects of the global conscious.
I also want to ask you this. Does Akashic fall in the realm of the occult? You know what they used to call alchemy in the previous years, in the past?
No, I think that the Akashic records encompasses everything, right? It does store the traumas as well, but that's how you identify them. So, like I said, with the card catalog, literally everything. You break ground for a building. Every scoop you take could potentially be a card in that catalog, depending on if there's, if you're disturbing tree roots or grass or flowers, or, the little beings, the worms and ants that live in the earth, right? So, I mean, they're all part of it, everything. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So it's basically you're denying that it's occult.
And you're saying that it's a storage system that records with records of past it's a reservoir of human emotion.
So the focus of my work is chronic pain, and I use movement and energy to help move that, to recreate the energy flow. So I have had people with anxiety, people with sciatica, people with low back issues that are not sciatica, neck issues, right? So working through the energy, finding whatever the trauma is, and there are some generalizations that can be done. Typically, if you have sciatica or low back pain, it's stored anger, whether it's yours or from your past lives or ancestors. That's often where it just chooses to live. If you know someone who constantly clears their throat, they don't know how to use their voice. And I give you that example because I used to do it all the time. So if you have say a low back problem where you have all that stored anger, there are certain positions that I'll put you in, and I'll do energy work while you're in this posture, and it enhances the ability to return that flow.
But is this a scientific body of knowledge, or is it a process of self-learning?
I would say, depending on your mindset, it could be an alternative. But it also, both Reiki and Akashic records work very seamlessly with modern medicine. So say you're dealing with cancer and now you're nauseous all the time, but you don't want to just take a bunch of drugs.
Right.
So then you would seek one of these or both of these different energy modalities to help you calm that system in your body. So
why is there resistance to it?
Why is there a resistance to it? Because in my opinion, there's resistance to it because it doesn't keep patients, right? Especially here in the US, our medical system is patient driven. So if you heal a patient, you lose that income stream.
Oh, okay.
Right? So it's really sad because all of these medical doctors and anybody who's working in the medical field that wants to help people are stymied by how our system works. And the ones that are frustrated with it because then they branch out and they maybe learn about nutrition, or they become a naturopath or move into a more holistic practice. So they're out there, but the bulk of our society is driven by the dollar. So, if you go to your doctor and say, hey, I'm going to try this energy work, well, you're just wasting your money, or you shouldn't do that, it's dangerous. And that's a mindset that maybe not all countries enjoy like we do here, because there's so much more progression in other countries.
How do you see human consciousness developing? You know, there's been pure human consciousness so far, but now there is the amalgamation with the machine. So there's not just the pure machine consciousness, but there's also the human interface with that machine consciousness. How do you see it developing? And basically we are creating something new in terms of consciousness.
Personally, I'm quite resistant to the AI. I don't know if that's just a form of limited thinking for me, or if it's, you know, if I'm just resisting that. But I find that it makes me uncomfortable because of the things that can be presented as reality they're not. So, you know, my own personal take on that is I guess it really can go either way depending on like who the author of the AI is. Are you doing something like to make a cute meme with a dragon, or are you doing it to literally fool people into something that like looks good but it's not real? I mean, you know, a little tiny dragon isn't real in as far as, you know, you're not going to step outside and see a dragon, but you might step outside and see two people coming together that you would never think would come together.
So we are creating a parallel universe, a false universe, if I may. Thinking back to Plato, if I may think back to Plato, and his concept of universal, the universal mirage. So are we creating an alternate false or imaginary world?
Right.
Thank
Right.
you so much, Tami. Thanks a ton. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You
I'll
too.
let you know when
Thank you.
I edit it.
Thank you. Take care.